Well, welcome to today's SMA program. We are back in Ms. Dot Padgett's house to talk some more about the special project that she worked on, which basically, if you remember the first program, she took a lot of time to go through the minutes of the meetings, all the way back to 1875, and we're here today to talk with her in this second part of a series of programs we're doing about this, and we're up to 1911. And one of the interesting things that happened in 1911 is actually there was a special session of the City Council to hear a Georgia State Chamber of Commerce person. And actually the council made, well, you tell us about it. They made some decisions based on the information they heard about the Chamber of Commerce, which we still have today in the city of Douglasville. We're very proud of the work that they do, and they're doing a tremendous job. So.
Well, number one, and I think this is so timely because the Chamber of Commerce, of course, is very well known and very active in Douglasville, Douglas County. And back then, when they had the special session, they wanted to decide whether they should join the Chamber of Commerce or not, and that was the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. And then they decided they would, and then they did a very brave thing. They appropriated $25 to send 6 of their delegates to a meeting in, I believe it was in Barnesville, Georgia. So you see, they might have been considered a little reckless with their money. But I think that the members of the Chamber of Commerce now would be interested in knowing that we did have one then, and it was an active Chamber of Commerce this many years back.
Yes, and they sent 5 delegates.
5 delegates at a cost of $25 to
which was a lot of money.
Well, absolutely.
That was half of the mayor's salary.
That's right.
But they do a great job today, and I'm sure they were doing a great job for the city.
Well, I think it tells you about Douglasville, something really about the visionary people that were part of Douglasville back years ago. Well,
there were a number of them after looking through here at all the people that really did the things that were necessary to get the city to where it is today. One of the things they did was in 1911 they built 2 fire stations. What did you find out about those as you were going through?
Oh, well, I didn't. If I found out about them, I've forgotten about it by now. But I do remember that we've talked about the location here, and the location was behind what's the Farmers and Merchants Bank, and it was a metal buildings. And later on, I guess they were renovated or something. But what I think is more interesting than that was the volunteer fire department. And for years, we had a volunteer fire department. And the only person that's left now that was a member of that volunteer fire department was Clyde Abercrombie. And I think he must have been about 14 or 15 when he volunteered.
Is that right?
And I'm sure by then he was probably even driving a car. But it was always interesting when the fire alarm would go off that these men would just leave their homes, jump into their pickup trucks, and go and get the. Of course, we had a lot more houses burned down than we do now. I don't think we've had a major fire in a long time.
One of the interesting things about that fire station, it says it was. One was built near the downtown Calaboose.
Calaboose.
Tell our audience about the Calaboose.
Well, obviously, it was a very popular spot because there was a lot of if you read through here, there were different places around town, maybe what we call the Dewdrop Inn, and there was a lot of saloons. So even though our town had some very prominent citizens that were probably law-abiding, we also had some that were not. But usually, though, the marshal, if somebody complained about it, which they did, they would come before the city council, that he would check them out. And, you know, there's a picture somewhere of the city Calaboose, but I don't remember exactly where it was located.
I don't remember seeing that. But
I never was a visitor.
But the fire station, one of the fire stations was obviously close to it. Yeah. I also remember, and maybe I'm jumping ahead and I don't remember what year it was, but the marshal was ordered in one of the city council meetings to go to one of the I guess it was an establishment where they served alcoholic beverages or something. They were playing an organ.
Playing an organ.
And so he was ordered to go out and talk to them.
Oh, man. You know, there was several. But you know what? There was something that we missed early on that I thought that was great. And that was in April the 1st each year, they had an award. And the theme, and this was how it was written, and I hope I can remember it, who was the citizen of, I'll have to come back to that if I can't remember that.
Okay.
But it was so funny the way it was written. But they awarded a citizen for the best, here it is, who has been a citizen for 10 days. So obviously they left out the word good citizen. But you could only be in the competition, that you had to be between 16 or 60. You could not be an ordained minister of the gospel.
Which assume you're a good person if you're
you already were. And it could only be a male.
Okay.
So anyway, but if you'll notice, though, it was on April the 1st.
April Fools'
Day. But they obviously had those. They were serious about their awards, and I don't mean to make light of it, but I thought it was kind of funny that they didn't let any of the ministers. I assumed they were already good, I guess.
Did you see any names in the minutes as you were going through there of people who may have received this award?
They did not put those, but I did see a few of the people who were arrested. But I thought that was kind of sensitive. We're going to
leave those out, though, right?
I thought that was a little bit sensitive.
Probably got some family members today that are watching this show.
Oh yeah, these people have stayed around Douglasville.
Sure. One of the things, if we can jump up to 1914, it says the mayor was authorized to sign a contract with the commissioner of Douglas County. I guess that's a commission chairman, for building a sewer line, a joint city-county sewer line. And the reason that was interesting to me is because at some point in time the city had its own sewer system. The county didn't, from what I've been able to find out, didn't have much of a sewer system at that time, and one would expect that because in the more rural areas, houses were a long ways apart. Mm-hmm. But we've came full circle today, and we have a joint combined Water and Sewer Authority, which is the Douglas County
Correct.
Water and Sewer Authority. So things change, but things sometimes come back just the way they were.
They stay the same. Yeah, I did a little thing when I put this little packet together about how the things that had to work together in Douglasville. And when the pioneer days met with modern times, rules were enforced to have harmony with the changing ways. Mules and automobiles were traveling on the same streets.
Right.
Obviously, there was some type of, we started to have septic tanks, and you had to have building codes and this type of thing. So, all of these things had to work together. You had outhouses, you had saloons, you had rowdy drunks, and you had hog pens.
Exactly.
So a lot of those things, and they leveled the law. We had to have the law enforcement for all of that, and we've eliminated some of the things. I think Douglasville seems to me to be a little quieter than it was in those days.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned septic tanks. Somewhere in here I read where someone came to the city council meeting and complained about it was 4 or 5 homes that obviously their septic system or lack of septic system was creating quite an odor.
Oh, yeah.
And so they drug the person in that apparently owned these homes, and they ordered him, I guess the city council could do that at that time, to connect to the sewer system.
Yes, I well remember reading that, and I well remember the name and that person is no longer around Douglas County. That was some years ago. But this was some rental property that he had, and he was not taking care of it. So the city council hauled him before them and said, you either do this or we're going to shut those houses down. So, they enforce the laws.
We do the same thing today.
Right.
Actually, for absentee landlords and folks that have homes that don't meet minimum standards, there's still a procedure to go through. And actually the city council from time to time, well, a judge, it goes before the municipal judge, they will actually tear these homes down when they they're a safety hazard to the community. So
yeah.
same things happen today.
Well, I can remember back many years ago, they used to condemn houses routinely because people just could not take care of them or something happened. I don't know.
An interesting thing happened, another interesting thing in 1914. There was some type military road built from Fort McPherson to Waco, Georgia. What were you able to find out about that? One of the things that came to mind first is that today's Highway 92? And if it is, we're in the process of building a new Highway 92 today. Yeah. So I was wondering what you found out about that.
Actually, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to that, except that I did notice it was 1914. And if it went from Fort McPherson, then it would have had to have been a military road because that was a lot of emphasis on the military roads at that time. But I don't know. I don't know a lot about it. But of course it became to be a well-traveled road with commuters once they paved it. It was not paved until maybe the 40s or the 50s. But also, what made it important was that it crossed the Chattahoochee River, and that road was one of the ones that did, and so it made it. Of course, most all roads cross the Chattahoochee River there in Douglas County, but there was a lot. There was a lot going on down there in that particular area where the.
Well, today we take bridges across large bodies of water like the Chattahoochee for granted. And you don't think anything about it. And I worked in downtown Atlanta for 24 years, crossed that bridge every day. But when we had our recent floods in September, a lot of those bridges were closed down. The ones that were not closed, they stopped traffic because they were afraid that they had been damaged. And I had to get across the river. And I could not get across the river. I ended up driving all the way to Carroll County in order to get across. And so I personally took bridges for granted until that happened. And I'm sure they didn't take them for granted then when there was a nice bridge built across the Chattahoochee. That was an important thing.
Oh, yeah, it was. It was very important. I've seen early pictures of the Chattahoochee. I don't know what kind of bridge was built then, but the one that until recently, I think it's been improved, was built early on. At some point, I'd like to tell you a really funny, interesting story, but we won't do it at this time, but we'll save it for another time. There's a young man that was a member of the Austell family. His name was Alfred Austell.
Austell named after his family?
Yeah, that was a very prominent family. And he graduated from, I think, Harvard, Princeton, in about early 1900s. When would be the first automobile that you could travel? It took him about 2 months to come home from there. But I'll tell you, but we'll wait till another time. And that's where he lived. His home was there, right at the river. 92.
Well, go ahead and tell our audience about it. We don't want to forget it. These are important things.
Well, I wish I could remember exactly the year that he traveled back, but he had a touring car, and it was before the Model A Ford, so it might have been 1908, something like that. But anyway, it took him months, and he stopped in North Carolina, I think, and picked up this nice-looking woman. And she traveled with him, and they came to Douglasville, and there are parts of this story that I don't remember, so I'm going to have to do this another time.
Okay.
But it ended up that they lived, and they built a huge house right there on the banks of the Chattahoochee River, and they were very, very party people, had a good time, and it ended up, though, that the lady's name, Mickey, I'm on.
Okay.
Remember this and go back because it's too good story for me not to.
We'll do that.
For me not to tell it right.
Can I ask one other question about this military road? It ended in Waco, Georgia. What was the significance of Waco?
I don't know. I can't remember Waco, but there obviously was some sort of military installation there back in 1914 during World War II. So or the beginning of the World War II.
It was also interesting that the vote count went down in 1914.
I saw
Only
that.
28 people voted
Yeah.
for the mayor and council and trustees.
Mm-hmm.
What were the trustees?
Oh, let me see if I can remember who. They did have a.
Was
Yes,
something
they did.
other
They
than
have
the
about
city
8
council?
people that were designated as trustees of the city,
Okay.
in addition to the council. Now, I don't know that we have a counterpart to that now. I suppose we do in these different committees, but we have some of the same committees that they had back then. But for many, many years, they had trustees, and there would be about 8 members, and they were the ones, I suppose, that looked after different segments of the town.
Well, we have
This
something.
might have been before they had the committees then.
We have something similar to that. I know I serve on a board of trustees,
Yeah.
several of them, for the Georgia Municipal Association.
Yeah.
And one of those is we do all the investment of the retirement money for all of the state or all the cities in the state of Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called a board of trustees. So maybe they were doing something with the investments for the city money or something like that. I don't know.
Well, yeah, there's a good story about what happened to the city money too, but no, it was not fraud or anything, but we might get into that later.
Oh, that'll be an interesting story, I'm sure.
Well, it was not fraud. It was had something to do with the Depression and when the banks failed.
You know, in 1917, we'll jump up to 1917. This was curious. Apparently, there was free mail. There was free mail service that was started in the town of Douglasville.
Yeah. Well, when did we start having free mail? Oh, I don't remember. I remember RFD was rural free delivery, and would that been about the? No, I don't think that came around until many, many years later. But I guess it must have been.
Yeah, in the minutes it says ordered necessary steps to be taken to get free mail delivery service to the town of Douglasville. So that obviously was an important step then.
I wish I could remember more about that because it was. In that, of course, the post office, we had a post office in the Hutchison building. That was where the post office was located for many, many years. And I think that building was built about 1914.
It still has the name on the front of it.
Yeah.
It sure does.
And so that was where I suppose that you would go and pick up your mail, and then they must have had. That's a little complicated to understand right now, unless they had free mail. Well, I guess they delivered the mail then around the town. That must have been what that meant. I have to go back and check that. You think Joyce will haul these books back out?
I'm sure she will. You know, some of these things we'll take notes and we'll go back and research them and maybe do a follow-up show on the things that would be interesting to get some of these answers to. Let's go back to the street tax. I noticed in 1920, we jumped a few years here, the street tax was $5, and it was on 16 to 50. What was it, 16 to
all
60
mails,
before?
16
to 50, they were charged $5 street tax.
Yeah. I guess they might have either lowered it or something and made it, it might have been a higher age limit.
I think it was earlier.
I guess they decided that those young guys were creating some problems for the streets. But I don't remember what that was.
In 1921, the Bankhead Highway Committee actually came before the City Council. It's on the bottom of page 9, and they were asking for $25 for the Bankhead Highway project. And that's what we know today is Highway 78. And the council actually approved that, so I assume they were paying for some of the highway maybe that went through the city of Douglasville. What do you think that was for?
Yeah, well, I had it somewhere in one of my notes, and I don't remember exactly when it was, that when they started the highway, and it was, it was not paid for, of course, until the 1930s. But yeah, that was a very important highway. Of course, it went right by the railroad tracks.
Sure.
So some of them probably thought we didn't need both of them. I don't know.
You really found something interesting in 1923, and that was apparently there were some bids that were, or a bid, I guess, that was accepted to tear down the James building. And there was $150 authorized to remove the building. And of course, as you know, that's where City Hall is today. Can you tell us a little bit about?
Well, yeah, Mr. James built this building, and he was a very civic-minded person, and he knew, that we needed to have a presence. And he was, because his family was being the first families to be the mayor, and that was a continuation of that. So he built a building, and it was the corner of what we know now as the city parking lot on Church Street.
Mm-hmm.
And he's designated that it could not be used for anything except a municipal building. So they didn't have at that time, the city hall was either in the courthouse. It had been moved from the courthouse, and there's a little bitty building behind. It was there on Campbellton Street. It's just one little building, one little office, just a small office, and. So anyway, he wouldn't let anyone use it for anything else, so the building had to be condemned and torn down. And then when Dr. O'Neill became mayor, he just started looking around and decided that we needed a building. And this was in the late 30s, early 40s. And so they designated that to put the city hall. And so it came completely around, which I think it's nice since they needed the building there anyway. And that's where the city hall was built. Of course, that's not the present city hall now. Right. The present city hall is so interesting. I know you've already told that story many times.
Well, tell us about the current city hall now. It's been many, many things, that particular building where City Hall is today. Tell our audience a little bit about the history of that particular building.
Oh, well, of course, when it was early on in the 1940s and early 40s, it was my favorite place in the whole wide world. It was the picture show.
All right.
And it was called the Alpha Theater. And so, that's where we entertained ourselves a lot by going there. And Joe Fowler, that we called him Bubba back then, but Mr. Fowler, who's the law firm now, after so many years, then he and his teenage friends, and my son was one of them, was designated to run the projector. And they start playing and messing around, and all of a sudden, the film would run out, and all you'd see was these things running on the screen, and everybody would start yelling and looking up, "Joe! Wake up, Joe!" So anyway, that was it. And then the building became a doctor's office for a while. But then they built an additional building on to that, and it was the men's store. And it was one of the finest men's store in the West Georgia area. And Dr. O'Neill and his sons ran the men's store. And so that was used for that way, and then there was a doctor's office in the part that is the reception area and the lobby area now. But up there where your office is probably where the projection
room, exactly,
or the balcony or something for the theater. But yeah, that was a very popular time. I can remember when it burned down and they built it back up again. That was a sad day in Douglasville. But the first theater in Douglasville was called the Crescent.
Where was it located?
It was located on the front street about where Fabiana's is now.
Okay.
And Mr. Smith ran it. But anyway, see, we've had theaters. Back in the olden days, people don't realize that we had just about everything in Douglasville that most other towns had. So anyway, that was... I think that was a good move, and I think they've done a very good job with changing that theater building into a city hall.
Oh, it
and
still
making the plaza.
serves our community very well today.
It all looks good up there, the plaza, all of it, because I can remember when that was a street in the pool room, and and you parked on that street there. Sure. And so I think it looks very well. I think they've done a good job with it.
Let me mention one thing about... before we close out today's show, you were talking about movies. I remember in in the town that I lived in. We had a movie theater also. And annually, the Bonnie and Clyde, you remember that? They would come to town and they'd have this movie, Bonnie and Clyde, and they'd have these cars. And I'm sure it wasn't the same cars, but it was cars from that era.
Yeah.
And they had bullet holes in them and all kinds of things.
I love that.
And we couldn't wait to go see that every year, and we saw it year after year after year. Did they come through Douglasville?
Bonnie and Clyde.
Well, the movie,
I don't
the
remember.
tour. It was a movie tour.
I remember that they would have.
Yeah.
Because, my day and time would have been a little earlier. Al Capone and I didn't bring one of his limos through with this. You know what? I don't want us to miss this now before we quit. But in October the 19th, in 1925, the city council voted to give $50 to the Douglasville High School's first football team.
In 1925, that was a lot of money.
That was a lot of money. That was more money than the city attorney made.
Exactly, Mr. Dodson.
That's right. So obviously they thought a lot of the football team back in those days. So I think they played their first game in 1926.
1926, and we still think a lot of them.
Oh, absolutely.
They have done a great job.
And if you look at the 1926 team, there's some names on there that you'll recognize. They're probably grandfathers or great-grandfathers of some of the people who live here now. But anyway, I thought that was a lot of money.
That is a lot of money, but it was important, I know, to the city, and it helped establish the Douglasville High School football team. They probably could not have started without that.
I don't know who they played, but I guess they had somebody around to play.
Well, thank you again for joining me on today and allowing me to come into your home, your beautiful home, and talk to you about some of the city's past history. We're up to 1925. I'd like to return and start at 1925 for another show, and we'll continue going through this. And this has been very enjoyable, and I appreciate you doing it for us.
Well, Mickey, one of the things that I like to use this ask for is to get people to come to downtown Douglasville, because our city downtown is so pretty, and we've been able to keep the historical significance here, and it's been important.
It really has.
So that's the reason I like for people to come into downtown and come into my home.
And the city just got an award. I don't know if you read about it in the paper. We won't take any more time today. I know we're running short on time, but at the beginning of the next show, maybe we can talk about the recent award that our Downtown Development Authority was able to get for us.
I think to preserve American cities or something.
It was, yeah. Well, thank you for joining us on today's Ask the Mayor program. We appreciate you joining us, and we thank you, Ms. Padgett, for letting us come into your beautiful home and talk about the city of Douglasville's past. Thank you very much for joining us today.